Well, I'm still working on hinges and have a bunch more of these to assemble, but they're getting there. So I thought I'd take a little break from that and get back to our draw knife project. This is one we forged out the other day. It's a two-piece laminate. It's W1 tool steel cutting edge on a mild steel body. And that video is just a couple of videos before this one. So if you didn't see it, I encourage you to go back to watch it and then come back to this one and watch it to see what we're up to next. So what are we up to next? Well, the first thing we need to do is straighten it. If I look down this, and I don't know if you can see it in the camera or not, but it has a bit of a bow in it. And all of the filing or grinding, however you choose to approach this at this point, will go much easier if you take that bow out first. Pretty easy to do. I'm just going to do it in the vise, and I'll show you an interesting little trick for straightening stuff in the vise. Now, of course, the obvious thing to do is just put it in the vise and give it a squeeze and hope it straightens out. The problem is it usually snaps right back again. You can take a little bit of bow out that way, but you're probably never going to get all of it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the worst of the bow here so I know right where it's at. And then I'm going to put a little pin in the vise on the side that the bow is on, and two pins opposite spread apart. And this creates a little jig that will help bow it a little bit further and kind of back bow it a little bit. And then you can, that pretty well got it right there. It might be just a touch right at the tang, although the tangs I could straighten pretty easily with a hammer or after we're done, because they're mild steel. The only cutting edge, the only tool steel runs right through here, and it is not hardened and tempered at this point, so that's not a big issue one way or the other. But the straighter it is now, the happier you'll be later. Yep, went too far that time. Now, can you do this to something that has been hardened? You can. You usually need to bring it back up to its tempering temperature to try it. I've had bad luck with it, but a lot of knife makers seem to do pretty well with it. I think it depends on the steel, and I think it depends on what it was tempered at initially as well. But I have had success if you go real slow and you work it, reheat it to your tempering temperature each time. It seems to make a little bit of a difference. But it's better just to keep it straight in the first place. Okay, I'm happy with that. So now, how do we progress with filing this? Well, the first thing I want to do is make sure the profile is good. I want to take all the lumps and bumps out here and all the lumps and bumps out of the cutting edge, which is absolutely vital. That needs to be straight. If for some reason you didn't feel like doing this, it would just add character, but to me it just looks like you didn't care. So I'm going to go ahead and file that flat and then file the cutting edge and get them nice and parallel. Now on the back, perfect straightness isn't completely critical, but on the front edge, the straighter it is, the better. So by keeping the file flat and filing the length this way, it's a lot harder to file, but you can see the high spots. You know that you're going to have to take more off there. And you can get a much straighter edge this way. Now the truth is, I would generally take this to the belt grinder. It's way faster. It has a flat platen that helps ensure a certain degree of flatness. Although you can screw them up pretty fast on there too, so you got to be careful. So that pretty well does our profile for the blade. It's fairly parallel, cleaned up nicely, although it would help to come back with a finer file or even some sandpaper and clean this up, or a fine belt on the belt sander, whatever it is you're doing. But before we do go to finishing steps, I would like to get the back flat. So we're going to do that and worry about mostly at the cutting edge. If it's flat all the way, that's perfect. If there's a few marks towards the spine, a few hammer marks, that's okay. But probably the first ½ inch here has to be free of any defects, or you'll bring those defects to the edge as you progressively sharpen this back over the years. Now, holding this perfectly flat in the vise can be a little bit of a challenge. So one way you can do that is simply to put a 2x4 up and put it up high enough that you'll be able to have room for a file, and then clamp this down to the 2x4. Now, because of the bevel, this will be at an angle, so you're not really filing flat with a 2x4, you're filing parallel with the flat edge. Hope that makes sense. Now, I'm just using some vice grip style C-clamps to hold this. Works very well. I've seen people that make a collar to go around a board like this and then tap a wedge in. That would also work well, and it might be a little bit less bulky than the C-clamps. Now, when I clamped it, it did rise up onto the back of the blade, so it's okay to just file flat. Now, when you're doing this, it's tempting to just attack the spots that are low and ignore the spots that you've already got down to bare metal. The problem with doing that, though, is that yes, these spots are low and you need to get down to them, but if you just file here till that's clean, this then is a high spot. So you need to take all the high material off until it reaches the lowest part. You can't just polish this up, because then you just end up with a bigger divot that's a polished divot. In an effort to get this just a little bit smoother, and to make sure that it's as flat as possible, you can draw file. That's just pulling the file towards you. Make sure your file's clean and doesn't have any chips in it, or all you do is end up putting big scratches in. Essentially what you would do if you were using sandpaper, you'd put sandpaper on a piece of bar stock or a piece of wood and just do the same thing over and over and over again with new sandpaper each couple of minutes until it's all flat and smooth. Now we want to do the same thing with the front, only in the front we're only concerned with the bevel. You can clean up the back of the knife up here that's not incorporated in the bevel if you'd like to. If you want a more refined draw knife. For this, let's Put the bevel right at the edge of our board. So now we want to file a good bevel. We want to file this about 30 degrees. If you've got a special purpose for your draw knife, you can adapt from that. You can go a little bit flatter, and if you do it on a belt grinder, you could hollow grind this and then just put a secondary bevel on there when you sharpen it. It's however you want to do it. Yes, you could do this with an angle grinder. It's a little bit imprecise. It's easy to get ripples and gouges and not keep a perfect angle. But it's a good way to clean the scale off and do some rough grinding and get a little extra material off. I think in the long run, you're still better to use a belt grinder or a file. A file can be a very precise instrument on this. So now that I've got that cleaned up, I'm going back to the file. Now you want to work this until you have a nice even edge. I'm a little thinner here, so I want to work more back in here. So it pays to unclamp it and check every now and then. And you are not trying to sharpen this. You're just trying to refine it and get it to be exactly what you want the shape to be and ready for hardening and tempering. I'm going to do a little draw filing on the spine where I haven't done it yet. And then we're going to deal with bending the handles. These are just some magnetic jaw inserts to keep me from scratching what I've already draw filed. They're kind of a polyurethane. The exact angle isn't all that important, but rarely do they come right to 90 degrees. Usually they're out so your hand is in a more comfortable position than in like this. But if there's a reason for you to do it one way or another, and you want enough room out here that you're not banging your knuckles on your work. So I'm going to just make an eyeball guess on this one, and that's where I want to bend it. But I want both sides to match. So I'll go from the edge of the blade, that's 3 inches, make a 3-inch mark on that side. And now I'm going to just heat those with a torch and put a little bit of a bend in there. Again, not quite 90 degrees. So I just want to heat the spot I want to bend. There's no reason to get the whole thing hot. It'll behave better if you're kind of careful with your heat. I'm just going to use a bending fork real quick and bend that not quite 90 degrees. Now remember, this part of the draw knife is actually mild steel, so we don't have to worry too much about overstressing it or anything else. Now I'm not going to put that in my hand because it's hot, but I think that's about the angle I want. So I'm going to draw that angle on my anvil, and that way I should be able to match it with the other side. Now when you turn this around, remember That corner's hot. Grab it in the middle. But that's also the reason I'm wearing a glove. Now the other thing you want to look at is, are the handles in line, and these are way off. So I'm going to need to do a little bit of tweaking to get them in line this direction. So I don't know if you can see that in the camera or not. One of these is fairly straight, one of them's leaning way back. One of them's probably okay, or both of them are probably okay as they are, but they have to be the same. Part of the issue is that a draw knife tends to work best either bevel down or bevel up when you're carving with it. And that depends a lot on the way the handles are. If the handles drop a little bit, that's more comfortable than if they rise up. So if the handles drop towards the flat side, it works better with the bevel up and is better for making long flat cuts. If the handles drop towards the bevel side, it's better bevel down, and that's better for getting down into contours like working on axe handles or something like that. So think about that when you do it. If you're not sure and you want a generic draw knife, make them in line with the flat side of the draw knife, and that way you can flip it over and it'll work pretty well for both directions. So I'm going to heat this up. I've got the flat of the blade clamped. I can kind of see where this tang twists a little bit. Then I'm just going to heat that to a very dull glow. Remember, this is mild steel out here. The tool steel is only along the edge. So it's pretty easy to straighten. In fact, you could do it cold, which is one of the advantages of mild steel. So use one as a guide, sight down it, get them both straight. If they aren't right, you can fix it later. This is also a good time to check and make sure your bends came out in the right place. And they are exactly the same. So that is a draw knife ready for its heat treatment. And I don't just mean hardening at this point. We have straightened it in the vise, we have filed on it, we've done a little bit of grinding with the angle grinder, and perhaps you've gone to the belt grinder and done some there. And all of those things can add more stress to the blade, even though you had stress relieved it through annealing or normalizing prior to this. Personally, I put this in the forge and let it cool at the forge. It doesn't fit in my bucket of vermiculite to do an annealing cycle. I just let it cool at the forge, so it doesn't cool it quite as slowly and controlled as burying it in the vermiculite, but it's slower than a regular normalizing cycle, and that makes it as soft as I could get it reasonably for the filing and the grinding and all that kind of stuff, and that makes filing so much easier. But now, because we probably put a little bit of stress in it, I think I need to go ahead and run it through a normalizing cycle, bring it up to temperature, let it slow cool, check it again, make sure it's still straight, that it doesn't warp while I'm doing that, straighten it if I need to, and if I have to straighten it, I'll normalize it again. And it may get tedious, and I may do that several times, but before I harden and temper, I want it to be as stress-free as possible so that it doesn't warp when I harden it. It's a lot harder to straighten something once it's been hardened and tempered. It can be done, but it's not as easy. So I'm going to light the coal forge because the propane forge is still waiting for the other burner parts. So we're going to do this in the coal forge. You could do it with a torch, but it's real easy to create uneven heating, which of course warps the blade if you do it with a torch. So the coal forge, I think, will be better for us. Well, I've got a nice fire going, and I'm going to turn the blower off and just start with the hot coals. And I'm going to put this spine down, the thickest section where it's just mild steel, because I want to bring that tool steel portion up to heat as slowly as I can. There's no reason to be in a hurry. slow, even heat. The proper normalizing temperature for W1 is 1500, which is really a fairly dull glow. It's not quite orange, it's in the red range. So we don't need to get it super hot. We just need to bring it up, make sure it's even, take our time, and then set it aside and let it air cool. As it heats up, we're going to want to bring it in and out and keep the heat even and not just heat from the center. And we may need to run the blower a little here and there, just enough to keep the fire at an even temperature. I'm starting to see just the faintest hint of a glow. I'm running the blower about 30 seconds out of every 2 minutes. Just at the non-magnetic points, we'll go just a little bit hotter than that. And then we're going to let this air cool. Just going to lean it up against the side of the forge here. Make sure there's no draft blowing on it. You can hear a fan in the background, but that's blowing on the bench where we were filing and nowhere near this end of the shop. Now our draw knife has been normalized. It still looks good and straight, so we are ready to harden and temper. To prepare for that, the fire is still hot, so we've got something to heat it in. I have a tray of water. One problem with a draw knife is it tends to be long and it's an awkward shape, so it's hard to quench very easily. So this long tray, this is like what you get at your food in at the buffets or a chow hall or something like that, and you can get these at a restaurant supply place, but you can find something else to quench in. I'll be able to get this in there well enough and move it just enough to be a good hardening quench. It's not ideal. I would rather use something deeper with more water in it, but for a single small draw knife it's going to work just fine. I have a bar of steel, heavy bar, heating up to red heat in the forge or orange heat. The temperature that bar is doesn't matter. We'll use that to temper, and we'll show you how that works as soon as we get to that point. And I have a brick. The brick will be to scrub the surface of the blade to polish it up so we can see the tempering colors. I think I'm going to get a harder brick. That one's awfully soft. So we are going to go back in the fire, just like before. We're going to bring it up to that same color, about 100 degrees beyond non-magnetic. And then we are going to quench it in our water tray as evenly as we can. After that, we'll polish it with the brick, just enough to see the temper colors run. Pull the big heavy bar out and go ahead and temper it. I hope that all makes sense. We'll do it one step at a time. And I'm just going to leave the big bar in here. It's not going to hurt anything. So this will probably take about 10 minutes of slow and controlled heating. A little bit of that is soak time so that it's a good even heat. Again, don't be in a hurry. This isn't a fast process. It's a controlled process. You probably have to turn the blower on about 30 seconds every 2 minutes, just like we did before. And that's not something I time. It's just sort of, fire looks like it's dying down. I'll bring it up a little bit. When it starts to look hot, then I turn the blower back off. You never want this to look like it's coming up to forging heat, though. That's way too hot. That's starting to show color. I'll move it so that the whole thing gets hot evenly. Remember, we don't want to get it too hot. . But at the point you quench it, it all needs to be as evenly hot as possible. And you quench it as the heat's coming up, not as the heat's dropping off. So you can't pull it off out of the fire and let it cool down a little bit if you overshoot it. That just means you overshot it. You really should let it cool completely off at that point. But if you just let it cool well below the critical temperature again, you're probably okay. Just try to avoid it. Still magnetic. And it pays to have rehearsed your quench a little bit, because I know I got to hold it in the tongs this way. If I hold it in the tongs from the end, then I'm going to have problems. I won't be able to get it down in my quench medium. In this case, that's water because it's W1 steel. You don't have to worry about getting the tangs hot. They are tool steel. They're not going to harden. That's just almost what I want. It'll probably never be perfectly even, but you want to get it as close as you can. And work it up and down and end to end. Don't go side to side, at least not until it's pretty cool, because that might induce some stress and make it bow, because you'll be cooling one side faster than the other at that point. So you want to cool it till you can touch it. We can touch. So now let's go to the anvil and shine it up with that brick. You don't need to do a perfect job, you just need to get enough of it cleaned up that you'll be able to see it. You need to do this fairly quickly because this is at maximum stress. It's looking for an excuse to blow itself apart. I'm going to use this block of steel now to draw my temper colors. And don't put the cutting edge right on this block of steel. You want it to draw up to the edge. You don't want to start at the edge and work back. What we're looking for here is kind of a bronze color. We're going to go past the straw color into the bronze range. Purple would be okay. Blue is probably too far. It won't hold an edge as well. Now I can tell by working this back and forth, this is warped and bowed just a little bit because it's got a high spot right in the middle. We'll have to deal with that after it's been tempered. I'm hoping you can see the colors run when it gets to that point. It's starting to turn a little bit, especially right through here. So I'm going to pull that off a little bit. Down here it's not changing at all. Okay, so I'm going to have to try and quench this part and leave the other part out. Not the ideal. So one reason doing this in an oven is so desirable. You can get the whole thing to quench evenly at one time. So I've got just a little purple there, but for the most part it's in that bronze range that I want, or close to the peacock range, which isn't too bad. You can do some of this with a torch. I think it's real easy to overshoot with a torch and get it really uneven because one side heats up while you're not expecting it and something else doesn't get hot enough, and it just can really cause a problem. You can see where it's been wet. I'm just trying to quench this end because it looks good and this other end isn't quite ready yet. But this is to some extent the nature of a tool done this way. Historically, tools were probably never as perfect as we want to believe in our idealistic minds of our forefathers making perfect stuff with crude and simple tools. We have the ability to do these almost perfectly by using a heat treating oven and a tempering oven, or they can be the same oven, and setting exact temperatures. You can get a perfect heat treat, and that would be my preference in most cases. But I think that's about as close as we're going to get. We've at least gone to the bronze stage everywhere. You see, we got into the peacock range and pretty close to the purple range in a few places. And all of that is acceptable for cutting edge. It just won't be a perfectly even cutting edge. And I may come back and I may just heat this a little bit separately. There's a lot of what might be considered art and intuition involved doing it this way. Just where to heat it and how long to hold it and when to move it. It's just something you got to do and you got to practice. So as I suspected, there is a very prominent bow in the back of this. And it happens to coincide with where the touch mark is, so I suspect that has something to do with it, because that changes the way the material behaves right in that spot. So what do we do with it? One option at this point is to leave it. If this is your own draw knife, you will quickly learn to adapt to that, and you may actually find it advantageous. I have made draw knives with intentional bows in them before. There's a lot of times that somebody might want one. Sometimes they're more than this, sometimes they're about what this is, for scooping and hollowing and just being able to work more in the middle of something without always knocking the edges off. And so it can be to your advantage to have that bow. The other option is to go back to the vise and go back to our straightening pins and try to straighten the knife back out. Once it's been tempered, you can do that. In the hardened stage, you would crack the tool steel. Now this brings up one of the advantages of the laminate construction with tool steel and mild steel. Because most of this is mild steel, it isn't going to be stressed, it isn't going to crack, it doesn't care if you do that little bit of bending cold. It's perfectly happy to do that. The tool steel is supported by that mild steel and is more likely to deal with it because of that extra support and less likely to stress and crack. You can bend tool steel. It's not that big a deal, and if it's properly tempered, it will take a bend. So you can probably straighten it. But if you have any little high or hard spots, any place where you didn't temper it back, like right here we have a little bit that isn't tempered perfectly, that's a little bit more likely to crack. So to do this, I would figure out that we came into what's called peacock. We didn't really quite make purple. Purple is just a little bit hotter. So let's take a look at a chart and see what color peacock is. Okay, I'm back. Didn't know I was gone, did you? I had to go into the house and look up the color charts to see exactly what temperature we're at. It's about 500 degrees based on the colors I'm seeing here. It may vary a little bit, but if we heat this up in a controlled environment to 500, we'll have a much more even temper all the way across. There may still be some spots that are tempered to a little higher temperature from this original tempering, but most of it would be even, and then I'd be fairly comfortable trying to straighten it. Trouble is, this doesn't fit in either my tempering oven, hardening and tempering oven, nor does it fit in the toaster oven I usually use for these things. That's because draw knives are an odd shape, and that always presents a problem with a draw knife. So I'm probably going to put it in the kitchen oven, or I will use a torch and very gently heat it. But like I say, it's real easy to get uneven spots with a torch. I don't like tempering with a torch. It can be done. A lot of people do it, but it's not the ideal. But I would like to take that bow out because it isn't an even bow. It's more of an odd kink. So I think I'm going to work on that. And we will do it as part of the next video because I am going to have to go take this in the house, put it in the kitchen oven for an hour, and this video will be in the editing process before this comes off and we have it for dinner. Oh no, we won't eat this. We'll have something else for dinner. It's perfectly acceptable to temper tools in the kitchen oven as far as the steel is concerned. The only issue you have is asking whoever does most of the cooking if it is okay to put that in the kitchen oven. If you have oil quench steels, make sure you scrub them first and get the oil residue off before you put them in the kitchen oven, because it stinks. But as far as the knife is concerned, it doesn't make a bit of difference if you do this in the kitchen oven. Now, as far as hardness, what have we got there? We decided that was about 500 degrees based on the charts in the Heat Treatment, Selection, and Application of Tool Steels, a book we've talked about before. 500 degrees for W1 is a Rockwell hardness of 59. That's hard. We could probably go to 550 and still have a good Rockwell hardness and a good edge holding ability for a draw knife. At 600, it's at 55 Rockwell, and that still isn't bad edge holding. For antique draw knives, that's probably about what a lot of them are. Glasses keep slipping off because it's sweaty in here today. Sorry about that. So what other issues might you have hardening and tempering? Well, obviously fitting this in things. If you have a gas forge with a back door, it might be too wide with the handles. Leave the handle straight when you harden and temper it, and just don't let the heat from the torch, when you bend these, bleed into the blade, and you'll be just fine. You can do that. And if this is an all tool steel draw knife, if you took that approach, that does help normalize this bend a little bit, and this is one of the stress points. Another option, if you need to get them out of your way and you can't leave it straight because it won't fit in your quench tub, is to actually bend them all the way back on themselves so that they're parallel with the back of the blade, harden it, temper it, then again heat them with the torch, straighten them back out again. Lots of options to find your way around problematic things. This draw knife ended up with a cutting edge just a little under 8 inches. Overall length looks like it's about 14 inches. For the size material we started with, the 1/2 inch bar, I think this is a little bit long. I think we could have used a shorter bar and a shorter piece of tool steel and gone to a slightly smaller draw knife, and it would have been better. It's a 1/4 inch thick at the back and 7/8 wide. I think for a draw knife this long, I'd rather have it about 1 1/4 inches wide. 1/4 inch thick isn't bad. A little thicker would be okay. And keep those things proportionate and try them out, experiment, see what you like. That's the only way you learn. And if you hit on something you really like, hopefully you took notes and you will be able to repeat those efforts. So where do we go from here? Well, like I say, I'm going to go ahead and give this a nice even temper, and then we're going to try and straighten it. And I'll do that as part of the next video. After that, we will polish this up as much as it needs to be polished. It doesn't have to be a complete mirror polish, although the better a polish job you do, the finer an edge it will hold. But whoever is the final owner might have to polish that up some. And that's not uncommon in old tools, that it was the new owner that had to do the final finishing on it. The blacksmith just got it close. So after it's polished and it's ready to sharpen, we won't actually finish sharpening it completely. It'll be time to do handles, and we'll do that down in the wood shop. And we will figure out what kind of handle to put on it. I'll think a little bit whether it's a turned handle or whether it's an octagonal handle or some sort of kind of free-form carved handle that's a little bit more blacksmithy looking, and then decide how we're going to attach the handles. There's several options, and we'll talk about that as part of that video. But we'll try to finish this up in the next video. And then I will also go into some of the advantages. I've implied a little bit about the advantages of the laminated steel, but I'll go over all those again and tell you all my thoughts on why I think forge welding might be better, or why I might think an all one-piece tool steel knife might be better. So if you want to know my thoughts on that, tune into the final part of the series on making a draw knife. Anyways, I think that's gone on long enough. It's about 5:30. I've got some hinges to finish up, I hope. Then it's time to head in for the evening, put this knife in the oven, and then we will get back to it in a day or two. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video and give it a thumbs up. Love it if you hit that subscribe button. Stick around, watch a few of the other videos, but then do make time in your day to get to your shop, make something, but do stay safe and do wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.